Matt, great to see you today, bud.
Thank you. Thank you very
There's
much.
some big news, I guess, in the whole SEO world.
Yes.
I want to talk about that today.
100%. Want to jump right in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, let's do it.
Jump right in. What happened?
So since the last time that you and I met, the last time that we were together with this was at AZPPO in Arizona. And I believe this actually happened on the 28th of last month. But there was a massive data dump out of Google. I think the jury's still out whether this was an intentional release of information or not. But the information was as fresh as data that Google had acquired in March of this year. And it has people like me in some ways celebrating that we had been doing some things right because we thought that that's how you're supposed to do it. And it turns out, according to Google, that's true. And then, but it definitely has some people like me scrambling to figure out next steps and how to adjust their strategies to follow suit. But the leak really had a lot to do with what's going on with websites, what's going on with ranking websites, and the role that SEO plays in domain authority for companies and for like overall business growth, for foot traffic on your business, whether or not Google regards you as something that is important to get in front of the user is super fascinating.
So how much stuff was in this document?
It's a lot. I don't want to miss. I have some notes because it's an incredible amount of. In fact, I'm going to switch my screen. I think I have it behind me. I do have it behind me. The document itself, something like 2,596 modules from Google were released, as well as 14,114 attributes that they evaluate to make a determination, let's say about Paul's home service website, right? The things that the tools that Google, the mechanisms that Google is using internally to decide whether or not this is an important website to get in front of a user. It's a lot of information. It is ugly. It is ugly to look at, but I've got my team parsing through it, just like everybody else in the digital marketing world, to try to figure out how do we pivot? What do we pivot? Do we need to pivot our strategies? It was pretty crazy.
So you guys were doing some things. You were doing some things the right way.
Yeah.
Were you also doing some things the wrong way?
For my biggest takeaway, I guess I can start there. My biggest takeaway, and we've reported on this historically for all of our partners. But my biggest takeaway from the document and kind of reading the articles about the document and honestly feeding this document to, I fed it to chat a couple times to be like, okay, help me understand what am I looking at. One of the things that we talk to our partners a lot about is domain authority. It's one of the KPIs. We've talked about KPIs a lot. It's one of the KPIs we use to measure the effectiveness of a website and how relevant it is to Google. In any given industry, every website has a domain authority, but I've always described it, and my team has always described it as an arbitrary number. If I were doing business for Paul, I would say, Paul, this figure is something that we keep an eye on. It's something that we want to constantly improve, but it's completely arbitrary. According to Google, they do not use this to determine whether or not your website is valuable or not. But according to that data dump, it's actually true. Google has publicly stated that they do not use a domain authority, but in fact they do. So I wouldn't say it's something that we were doing wrong. I guess it gave validity to something that we've been focusing on this whole time, which was incredibly interesting, to say the least.
I guess, I'd heard that, and obviously the reason why we're having these chats is I don't know anything about SEO or internet marketing, but I remember like 15 years ago, domain authority was the whole, everyone always talked about it. Like, well, what is your domain authority? And there were all these websites, you plug in your domain, you figure out what the authority is, and then it kind of disappeared from the vernacular, right?
Well,
so you're saying it actually...
It disappeared, but Google was always also like, no. We don't do this, right? Pay attention over here, right? Is a little bit of the example that I thought of when this drop happened and we were kind of like, what are we looking at here? Is like when Dorothy gets behind the curtain of Oz the first time and she sees, oh, You're back here,
Yeah.
right? That's exactly what
Yeah.
this drop was. It's looking at some of the nuts and bolts, and some of these nuts and bolts may have changed, and it's an ever evolving process. Search is an ever evolving kind of process, but yeah, I think some of it was, 15 years ago, domain authority, do we pay attention to it? Nah, Google says no. To all of a sudden, apparently Google pays pretty close attention to your domain authority. And there are some components that they use to evaluate how important it is. I guess, I think that this may not be current, but the most current time I had researched domain authority is, I think Facebook is the only public company with 100 for a domain authority. Most new companies start somewhere in the low tens, early teens, right? Maybe if they've got good content.
Yeah.
And then other more mature companies. I think when we sold our business back in the day, our domain authority was like 34, right? I think Terminix and Ron, I haven't checked in on them in a minute. In fact, I even hesitate to give this metric because it's been a little while, maybe even a year. But the last time I checked in on their domain authority, it was in the high 60s, right? So this is just something that you use to climb to determine, are we improving? Are we shrinking? What are we doing?
So what is domain authority?
Yeah.
I mean, in a nutshell, how is it calculated?
Yeah. So I want to say that domain authority is calculated by some factors that determine relevance of your site to the user. The user searches for a business, and Paul's business matches the criteria of this business type to provide this for the user, because Google's a business, right? Google knows that its advertisers are going to keep coming back and keep working through the system if the system works, if the system is good at bringing new business to people who are looking for it, right? So relevance is one of the biggest factors, and that comes down to content. And then traffic, direct traffic was one of the other factors as determined by this dump. And what's interesting about that is direct traffic would mean, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. So Paul's running a business. Paul's creating a lot of content about his business. Paul's got a plumbing business, right? And he's making a lot of content about his business. And Paul is becoming well known in his Puerto Rican demographic area for his business. Yeah. So people are searching for Paul's business specifically on Google. That KPI to Google is important to let Google know, hey, this is a very relevant business. People are searching this business of this business type by name. Let me get this business in front of the user, which I thought was super fascinating. The other thing that I thought was weird was it measured Google. It was actually in that huge data dump, 14,000 logs of information that it uses to evaluate your website. It is evaluating every click that's happening on your website. Good clicks, bad clicks, and direct clicks, people that are making decisions, making it to conversion actions based upon those clicks. That was all kind of revealed in that data dump. And as a business, we think about these things all the time as a way to improve business for our partners. But it was like it's kind of like the scales getting lifted off your eyes. We're looking at Google saying, no, this is something that we use to determine the effectiveness of Paul's website, right? And your marketing company is the company that's driving those for you. It was super fascinating.
What's when you said good click versus a bad click, I mean, what does that mean?
Yeah. So a good click is a click with intent, right? According to Google, right? A click that is, hey, this person has searched for Paul's business type. They've made it to Paul's website. A good click means they have created an item of intent. They're looking for more information, or they're making a buying decision on Paul's website. That's a good click, right? A bad click, a great example of it would be exiting out of your website quickly, right? That flags to Google. That's a small example, but that's an example of, hey, this website may not be relevant. We may not have to use this to get this in front of a user. And then a click of intent is obviously like we're making a buying decision. We have hit submit. We have purchased. We've added something to the cart, right? We've taken some action items to kind of do that. So those are the kinds of things that use. And then the other one was one thing that we talked about actually on our last podcast that we're together. So it's funny how these will drop. There'll be one more in between, but on episode number 2,
Yep.
we talked about content creators, right? And how important it is to make content. POTOMAC is doing this right now, right? You guys are kicking out content regularly. And listen to this. This comes straight from data mining this information. This was a quote taken from an article from what is this? From Moz, right? If there is a universal piece of advice for marketers seeking to broadly improve their organic search ranking and traffic, it would be, quote, build a notable, popular, well-recognized brand in your space outside of Google search, right? So I think one of the examples I gave the last time that we talked with the Goins, we talk about them a lot. We talked about Nutura. They're making this content. They're linking it to their website. This content lives outside of the website, right? This is improving their domain authority. It's letting Google know this is relevant. This content is fresh. Let's get it to the user as quickly as possible so this user can make a buying decision, and we can signal to the business, hey, look, we're driving business your way. Keep using us, right? Keep relying on us. I thought that was crazy fascinating. Site authority. Same thing as domain authority, right? So we call it domain authority internally. Google calls it, apparently this whole time, site authority. And again, we'd use this like an arbitrary metric, thinking, this is just something, a KPI that we measure against ourselves. Have we improved domain authority or site authority over time? Google told us something like this existing in 2011 after Panda update launched, stating publicly, low quality content on part of a site can impact a site's ranking as a whole. Low quality content, meaning Paul's got a business. Paul's writing about some random stuff on his website. It's not necessarily related to the business or what the user provided to get there. We have dinged his site authority. So we're going to lower that down and raise some other companies up, right? Google has denied that they've used this metric up until this data dump. Now they kind of can't hide it. At least as early as March of this year, they can't hide that site authority or domain authority is important to them, just as important as it is to us, which is awesome. It's awesome for us.
What are some main takeaways for business owners out there when they start to think about their own content marketing strategies?
Yeah, huge. This is a great question. I feel like you just threw me a underhanded pitch. I think one of the larger things I took away, and honestly, we're still kind of parsing through this. Today is I think it's the 3rd or the 4th. This data mine is still pretty recent, right? So everybody's digging through.
Yep.
But freshness really does matter according to Google, right? I've worked with so many partners or businesses that think we've got a pretty big website. There's a lot of content on there. We're just going to stop focusing on that right now and focus on other things. Habitually creating things. And we talked about this on episode 1, I think. And also creating content that is connected to your Google My Business page creates a freshness to Google that's really important. The article said this: Google looks at dates in the bylines, URL syndicate dates, and on-page content dates to determine whether a document is or isn't core to what the user just searched for, right? Is this information relevant? Is it timely? And is the user searching for this? I think that was one of the biggest epiphanies, right? We've got a strategy that we use for our partners that's improving their domain authority. It's improving their site traffic. It's improving their conversions, and it's working, right? And we devise this plan from my history in content marketing, digital marketing, and then my team's history in content marketing. This is how we're going to do it here according to our collective understanding, right? And it just turned out that we were doing it right, that the cadence, the freshness, and that the relevance of the things that we were creating really does matter to Google, and it factors it in very heavily when it determines, do we offer this to the user or do we bypass this and give them another business?
So you're saying you were using the Goins as an example of content that lives outside of their website, because you're saying they're doing like TikTok videos and all sorts of other things.
Yep.
Refresh my memory. I know we talked about this in Arizona, but I know they do the TikTok videos. I certainly see them on LinkedIn.
Yep. LinkedIn like crazy. Ryan's on LinkedIn like crazy. They're definitely updating their social media, their Instagram, right? All of these things. Think of it like if your website is the mothership, these other places are like a satellite, and you need to link to your satellites from the mothership. And it's letting Google know that this is a business. They are creating content. They are creating fresh content. This is something that we need to get to the user. This isn't something that's old and dusty and has been sitting here on this on Google untouched for the last 6 months, right? They posted. I mean, shout out Ryan. How many shout outs we can give this guy? I think he posted on LinkedIn twice today. So as long as these things are connected to their site, it matters to Google, and it's going to help.
So are you saying if you've got a resi or commercial service business out there, you should have not only a website, obviously,
Yep.
you should have a LinkedIn profile,
Yep.
you should be on Facebook and Instagram?
Yep. Yep. And if you're loving life and if you've got the time, you need to be making content. It could be tutorials. It could be helpful guides. It could be introductions. It could be stories about your business, but you need to be creating videos and throwing those things up on YouTube as well. Make a YouTube channel. That's kind of a low bar. We can help with stuff like that, but it's so much better when, I mean, honestly, for Potomac, when Dylan does it, but when the Goins do it themselves, they're saving money.
Yeah.
And they're creating more content. You can create a piece of content that goes on YouTube that you can multi-purpose down into your LinkedIn, down into your Instagram, down into your TikTok, right? These things you don't have to do all of them separately. You can kind of create a strategy, and we help partners build strategies to implement them in one place and kind of carry that same content to multiple areas. So you're killing a couple of birds with one stone, not two, like four.
Then I have a question.
Yep.
If I run a local pest control business, and let's say my location is Charlotte, North Carolina, right? And so I'm just in Charlotte. Let's talk about Killingsworth, right? So you got Killingsworth is effectively a Charlotte area business. You're putting all of this, let's say that you start doing cool stuff on YouTube and you're doing like pest identification and all sorts of interesting videos, decently quality stuff, which you can shoot on your phone, basically. You know, being a resi service business, by definition, is typically a regional business, right? And so what happened? I mean, are you tagging this YouTube content in some way, shape, or form, or keywording it to the locality of the business? Because obviously, if I'm based in California and I pull that up, it might be helpful for me to understand what sort of bug this is, but it's not going to do the business any good because you're not servicing California. So how do you think about that?
So your descriptions have to be thoughtful, right? Descriptions for what you're doing. Let's pretend I'm back at Paul's plumbing business, right? Paul's creating some helpful.
Here in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, here in Puerto Rico. Paul's creating some helpful plumbing tutorials, and he's loading them up on, obviously this is specific to Puerto Rico. You can't go anywhere, right? This is in Puerto Rico. So Paul's descriptions are thoughtful. Discussing your location, discussing the topic, being very descriptive with the words that it uses. It needs to be researched, right? You can't just shoot from the hip necessarily. But then also what links it to the site is if you've got a media page on your website and you are embedding the YouTube video into your website, you're connecting the satellite to the mothership, right? That's what's helpful with Google when it comes to domain authority. That's how you utilize the tool to kind of throw a lifeline out to your YouTube page, right? So you're right. You do have to have the right content, but if it's connected to your site and your site is geographically centered in a particular place and your Google My Business, for example, is also anchored to that site, you are letting Google know in 3 different ways at that point: in your YouTube description, at the contact us page on your website, and then by virtue of being connected to your Google My Business page. I live in Puerto Rico. This business operates in Puerto Rico. Only offer this information to people who are typically searching in this area.
When you talk about like domain authority, what sort of advantages does a company that has like a domain that's maybe 20 years old versus somebody who just set up a domain 6 months ago? What does duration do?
Bro, that's another underhanded throw. And I'm still kind of looking into this because for a while in digital marketing, my dad would get pissed about this stuff all the time. He'd say, how this company is 2 years old. How's their website in front of my website? Right. There was
I like the accent.
Yeah. I don't know why it automatically turns on. From a digital marketing perspective, take off your Paul's Plumbing hat, put on your Paul's digital marketing company hat. We called this the sandbox internally, and it was theory, right? It was a theory that if Paul built a new website, Google was going to place it in a sandbox for a little bit before it went to play with the big boys, right? And the sandbox was a hypothesis that we used to explain that to our clients. Well, it turns out from this data dump that Google may in fact have like a legit sandbox for Paul's brand new website that's only 6 months old, can live for a minute. It's for an indeterminate amount of time. before it gets to a particular size where it can go and start to play with the big boys. We're still kind of looking into that, see how long Paul's new plumbing website can live in the sandbox before it graduates to the monkey bars, right? According to the data dump, it looks like that's true. So domain authority is true. Click evaluation is true. Freshness is true. And then the sandbox, it looks like it's true, which is kind of crazy because again, I know this is like baseball talk, but when we're all like around the water cooler and we've got a pissed off partner who's got a 10-year-old company, but this new, Squarespace website's popped up out of nowhere and it's outranking them or showing up above theirs. They're like, you're not doing your job, blah, 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 blah. We would scratch our heads and be like, they must be in the sandbox, but we thought we were just like full of shit, but we weren't apparently. Yeah. So,
well, I asked that question because I remember maybe 10 years ago or so, I did a transaction with a guy who, had a relatively young pest control business and it grew rapidly. And we were talking about online marketing. And he said, yeah, when I started this business, instead of buying the domain xyzpestcontrol.com, he bought that for his company, but he went out and he found another company that had a variety of different domains and one that had been around for 15 years prior to that, and like some other pest control company was using it. And he went and offered the guy a sizable amount of money for a domain. It was maybe like 10 or 15 grand. Like he bought and I was scratching my head. I said, why on earth would you do that? And he's like, that thing has been seasoned for 10 or 15 years now. Now, there hasn't been a ton of activity, but Google knows that thing's been around. When I take that, I'm going to put all my stuff on it. I'm going to be way ahead of being a brand new domain. And I just don't know if that holds true anymore, but maybe you can come back to us after your further research on that topic.
After the deep dive,
yes,
all the ladies on my SEO team have been digging in with me probably in the last little over a week now, and myself. But we are definitely. I'm talking to other digital marketing companies. My mentor and friends that are in digital marketing spaces. Ask them, how do you evaluate this particular, what it was at the API 13,961 states this. Yeah. So how do you, I'm pulling that out of my ass, but how do you evaluate this thing that it looks like is pointing to? And it's, we're definitely going to be continuing to do some research to kind of bring that forward because A, it'll help us explain it better to partners. B, partners do need to be keeping things fresh, updating, revitalizing, hitting the reset button every now and then, especially if your website is ancient, right? But C, we do have to get to the bottom of how long a company's in the sandbox because digital marketing companies get thrown through the ringer every time a partner sees some new kid on the block stepped up above his stuff. It is brutal. It is a brutal phone call.
Well, let me ask you this, Matt. Yeah. We've got obviously Chat GPT and all this AI stuff now, and folks are using it to write things. And so, I pondered the other day, like, what happens when you got a bunch of dudes sitting around owning I own an HVAC company and I write a bunch of bullshit articles with like Chat GPT. I get in there and I'm an HVAC guy and I'm like, hey, write me an article about why you should have maintenance on your HVAC or your air conditioning, whatever. And I just have to imagine there's going to be like almost like an arms race of companies just using AI to write a bunch of bullshit and putting it online. Yeah. I mean, how should we think about that as business owners?
Good. You're making this easy for me. So two things. The first is content that is relevant. That the idea behind content is that it has to be relevant to the user. And users like Paul from Paul's Plumbing wouldn't normally have access to or know how to operate the keyword planner tool inside of Google. We've talked about that. It gives you trailing 12-month data, the 12 months behind me. Search trends look like this. Build content with high performing search terms according to this calendar, right? So that's the first piece of the puzzle. But the second piece of the puzzle, after people have been diving in this and had determined that branding and things that exist outside of Google matters, the other one was that entities matter. Entities matter, and authorship of content is important. It says Google stores authors' information associated with content and tries to determine whether an entity is the author of the document, right? It's evaluating and cross-evaluating and not being particularly kind with AI-centric solely AI centric content development, right? There are actually counter tools out there now for AI that can help determine whether content specifically is written in large or in part by AI, right? So Google cares about authorship, that authorship is consistent and that the authorship of the content that's being created is associated with the business itself, which is wild. It's wild. That's pretty advanced if you think about it.
Well, then that leads me to my next question. At Roger's Amazing Fucking Homeschool,
Yep.
How is it that you will make sure that your children aren't using AI to write their reports?
I mean, those poor kids. They should have been like doing Roger's Fucking Amazing Homeschool to like in like the Amish country or something like that. The problem is because their dad is in digital marketing, I'm already using the tools. I'm gonna copy the report and paste it in the tool to determine whether or not they cheated. They actually got busted this morning over a cup of coffee for doing a little bit of cheating.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, fresh. That's pretty fresh. That's tender, Paul. But yeah, the advent of AI is super interesting. It's still not perfect. It still has uses, but you can't rely on it solely. Anybody that's relying on it solely is doing themselves a disservice. According to the data dump, slowly over time, they're going to disqualify themselves if they rely on it too heavily, right? It's like, I don't know, it's like a bad drug. It's like an easy button. Nothing good comes from the easy button. That's true.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you going over the leak and the latest and greatest in content marketing.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll come back to the leak, Matt, once you've had this. I know we just found out about this and jumped on here to talk about it, but once you've been able to digest it further,
okay,
I definitely want to go through the nuggets.
All 14,000 nuggets. We'll do it.
All of them. One by one.
One by one.
All right, brother. Until the next time.